and do what you need to do, because you're the one that's going to stand before God. You're the one that's going to answer for it. But Saul said, they brought them back. The people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord. And the rest we destroyed. We got rid of all that other stuff. If you go back up to verse 9, I know I'm jumping backwards, but I want you to get this point. In the end of verse 9 is that it talks about how they kept the best of everything. The last part of verse 9 says, but everything that was wow and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. There's some stuff that's easy to get rid of. There's some stuff that's easy to turn your back on. There's some stuff that's easy to avoid. And that's what they did. Well, this stuff's garbage anyway, so let's destroy it and we'll keep the good stuff. It's the same thing in the world today, in your life today. The flesh wants the good stuff. It's easy to get rid of the refuse, the bad stuff, the trash, the garbage. It's easy to get rid of all of that and hang on to the good and make those excuses like Saul did. But when God says get rid of it all, then you've got to get rid of it all. You've got to do exactly what God said. And I know I'm talking about getting rid of things, but this doesn't just apply to that. It applies to everything in your life. If God says go left and you go right, then you have disobeyed God. If God says do this and you do that, you have disobeyed God. If God says don't go over there and you go over there, you have disobeyed God. And again, I want to make this point very clear. You don't have to be going out here and doing all manner of evil. It's not about that. It's about following the voice of God. Right. When you don't follow the voice of God, you have disobeyed God. And you have turned away from following God. And you're in the same place that Saul was in. We go on here in the chapter, verse 18, and Samuel's recounting what happened here. It said, the Lord sent thee on a journey and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed. Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said unto Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. Over and over and over. Saul just keeps saying, it's okay. I'm all right. God is okay with that. And that's what we do. That's what Christians today do. And I'm not saying anybody here does it. I know in my life I have done it. But the time we live in, the influence of everything that's going on, it's easy to do that. And we have to be on guard, and we have to be careful. Not to say, you know, I don't know how many people I've heard say this, and I'm sure you have too. Well, you know, if I just do this thing other than doing this thing that I know would please God, it's okay because God knows my heart. Mm-hmm. Yeah. God understands. And I say this often, and I mean it. Yeah, God does know your heart. That's your problem. He does know your heart. He knows you prefer that over doing what He told you to do. That's right. And God does understand. God understands your disobedience. You don't understand. That's the problem. He said, the Lord sent you on a journey and told you to do this. And Saul says, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I've gone the way the Lord sent me. I brought Agag, king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. See how I threw that one little thing in the middle of that? I did what the Lord told me. I destroyed everything. But I brought the king back. But I utterly destroyed everything else. He wants you just to overlook that part. Well, God won't overlook it. And it's the same with us. And I can't stress this enough. It's 100% compliance. And no, none of us are going to do that. But we have to strive for that. Right. And when we willingly disobey, that's what Saul did. He had clear instructions. There was no doubt about what God said. He said destroy everything and everybody. That's clear. And so he made excuses. And you know, he said, I have done what the Lord said. But the people did this and did that and all that. But I want to get to verse 22. Samuel said this, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. What is he saying? Above all else that you do, going to church, putting in your tithe, paying your 10%, giving to the poor, all of those other things, I would rather that you obey than anything else. How many Christians today are counting on the fact that they attend church regularly, they pay their tithe, they're kind, they support foreign missions. How many are dependent on that? What did God say? Rather than all of that, I would rather you obey in everything. In everything. You know, if the Lord would have me to do something and I don't do that thing, but I show up here every time we have service. I preach, I teach Sunday school, I do this, I do that, I do all these other things. But when God tells me to do something, I don't do it. God is not pleased.
Right.
You know what God says about that? The same thing he said about Saul. You have turned from following me. No, God, I haven't. Look, I'm here every Sunday. I put money in the offering. I get up here and preach. I teach Sunday school. I do this and I do that. And God says that you have turned from following me. I would rather that you listen to me, that you do what I say than anything else. The church needs to understand this. And again, I'm not saying anybody here is in this. God gave me the message for a reason.
Right.
Do with it what God would have you do with it. We need to understand this is serious business. We as the church, for so long now, have thought we can just live however we want. We can live haphazardly. As long as we say a prayer before we go to sleep, and you know, say grace over our food and show up at church once in a while and put a couple bucks in the plate, we're good. That's not what it's all about.
Right.
All those other things should stem from being obedient to God. That should be first. That should be top priority, above everything else. He said, as the Lord has great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. Now here's what I started out talking about, for rebellion. Rebellion. Did Saul get up and say, no, Lord, I ain't listening to you? Did he say, I'm going my own way? We ain't following you no more. We're going to do it Saul's way. He didn't do anything like that. He followed God's commands about 75%. But God said, you have rebelled. You have turned from following me. So listen. If Saul was disobedient, and he was told by God that you have rebelled, that you are in rebellion, what if we are disobedient? We are in rebellion. And again, why God keeps rolling these things in my mind, I don't know, but he knows. You can say, well, there's this thing I really want to do, and this is the only chance I'm going to have to do that. But God is saying, I want you to do this, whatever it is. Go on visitation, go pray with someone. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But if God says, I want you to do that, and you're saying, well, I can do that anytime. This is my only chance to do this, and you go do that. We're like Saul. We have turned from following God, and we are in rebellion. And listen to what he compares that to. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Come on. Just because I didn't do one thing God said to do. God looks at that as bad as witchcraft. That's idolatry. He says, I quit following. What he said. I didn't make it up. You got the words right there. That's what God said. Do you see how serious God takes things? Do we really? Does the church today see how serious God takes things? I don't think we do. We better start taking God seriously. And you know what? Maybe you would have got off the hook if we would have never known, but now you know. So now you're responsible. And there's consequences to this. I want to jump ahead chapter 16. After all of this happened, verse 14 of chapter 16. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. Does God send evil spirits? Now, before I go on here, if you read on, or if you have read on, or you remember Saul's history, the account of Saul in the Bible, when you look at Saul from this point forward, you can see a man who is in depression, has anxiety, is paranoid, can't control his temper. Why? Because that evil spirit is causing these things to happen in his life. And you can see that Saul is up and down. There are times when Saul's okay. But then he threw a spear at his own son. We all know the account of him trying to kill David. You go read the rest of Saul's life after this. Saul was a mess. And you can see those things that I talked about. Paranoia and anxiety and depression and every once in a while just totally losing his mind. And acting, just totally off the wall. Because God wasn't with him anymore. Have you ever been in rebellion against God? Don't shake your head now until I finish my question. Have you ever been in rebellion against God and you're going along in your life and for whatever reason, you're just down?
Oh, yeah.
You get anxiety. I'm not saying it is. I'm going to ask a question. I think maybe that has something to do with being a little far away from God.
I'd say it does.
The Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. What would you do if that happened to you? What should you do? You ought to fall on your face and cry out for mercy. You ought to fall on your face and beg God for forgiveness. But what did Saul do? He said, I'm skipping through, you can read on. But his servants, his people that were close to him said, all you need is to get somebody that plays good music.
Yeah.
And soothe your spirit. And so that's what Saul did. Instead of crying out to God for forgiveness, for restoration, for what he needed, he just wanted to get somebody that could soothe him. That's what the church does a lot of. That's what Christians do a lot of. Just get something that can make me feel better about myself. Just get somebody that'll tickle my ear. Get somebody to tell me I'm okay. That's what the church does a lot. And it works for a little while. If you read this, it says, Saul told his servants, provide me a man that can play well and bring him to me. And we all know they brought David. And when David would play, what happened? Verse 23 of 16 says, and it came to pass when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. So it worked. He could quiet it for a while. And you can do the same thing. And because you can do the same thing, you can convince yourself, well, I must be all right, or I wouldn't have felt that. I must be all right, or, that music wouldn't have moved me like it moved me. Saul was in a bad place. I read it to you. There was an evil spirit there, but the music moved him. Why did the music move him? Because it was an emotional thing. And a lot of times we are deceived by our own emotions. When we need to go to the Word of God and find out, am I in the will of God? Not count on the goosebumps to tell me I'm in the will of God. I've seen people sit and get goosebumps and bawl at movies. Does that mean God was in it?
No.
We can deceive ourselves.
Right.
We can fool ourselves. You know, you can go to a church singing that has good groups, and everybody's really into it and clapping and happy and standing, and before you know it, you're caught up in that, and you're doing the same thing. And then you're telling yourself, well, me and God must be all right. You know, at this point, when it says David played and Saul was refreshed and the evil spirit departed from him, he could have told himself, well, now me and God's all right. But you go a couple more verses over and find out what happened. He's right back where he was. It's not about the feelings. It's not about the emotion. You know, those things are great, and God does use those things, but it's not about those. You got to line up with this word.
Right.
If I have done what Saul did, if I have been disobedient, if I have been rebellious, if I have turned from following God, and I'm not talking like quit coming to church, quit being a preacher, and just go out there in the world and do whatever. I'm not talking about that. That's not what Saul did.
Right.
Saul did most of what God said to do. And we sometimes do most of what God says to do. If we do that and we turn away from God, it doesn't mean that God has forgiven me and everything's all right because I feel good from time to time. I have to go into this Word and make sure I'm lining up with this Word. This Word will let me know where I stand. This Word will let me know if I'm in the will of God. And you know what? I can be in the will of God and not feel a thing.
Right.
Everybody's waiting to feel something.
Yeah.
If I line up with this, then I'm in the will of God.
Right.
Whether I get goosebumps or not. Whether I cry or not. If I'm lined up with this, I'm in the will of God. We as the church are a rebellious people. We are. The church in general. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody here. But the church in general today is a rebellious people. There's a scripture, and I can't remember it exactly or which one of the prophets wrote it, but God said to one of the prophets, you live in a house or a nation of rebellious people. We do. And we're easily influenced. And we have been influenced. The church has become rebellious. Yes, Brady already said this 10 times. Well, I'm going to say it again. I don't mean you got to totally walk away from the church. I don't mean you got to go out and start doing every wickedness you can imagine. All you got to do is be disobedient to God.
Right.
And you're in rebellion. You have turned from following God. Whatever your excuse, whatever your reason, whatever you want to tell yourself, if somebody else told you it was okay, that don't fly with God.
Right.
We need to line up with this word. And if we don't line up with this word, we're going to give an account one day. We are going to stand before God. And I'm just going to recap something here quickly and I'll be done. Remember what happened to Saul. He didn't go too far off of what God said, but he went off of what God said. God said, you turn from following me. You are rebellious. I'm taking my spirit from you. And in place of that, an evil spirit came. And look at the rest of Saul's life. Can it happen to us?
Yes.
I believe it has happened to a lot of people and they don't even realize it. Because, like I said, every once in a while they feel good. You know, they can go to church and get to feeling good. They can hear good music and get to feeling good. So they think they're okay. But we got to line up with this. This is the final authority. If we don't line up with this, I'll just say it like God said it to Saul. You have turned from following me. And your rebellion is as the sin of your... I'm on my mind, so I'm going to say it. What does the Bible say about witchcraft? Well, what does it say about a witch? Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. I'm not saying we should be killing anybody. What I'm saying is, God thinks witchcraft is something pretty awful if he would say you shouldn't suffer a witch to live. And when he compares what Saul did to that, God is taking that seriously. We better take it seriously. That's it. I'm going to stop there. Let's pray.